Hello and welcome back to the Hudson Hangout. Today I'm interviewing Ryan Sickler. He's a headlining stand-up comedian. In 2018, his comedy album, Get a Hold of Yourself, became a #1 hit on the Billboard charts. Ryan is also well known as the host of the Honeydew podcast, which features storytellers and stand-ups as guests. He also produces comedy shows on Epix, E, and Comedy Central. Hi Ryan, and thanks for coming to the show.
Thanks for having me on, man. I really appreciate it.
Now, let's get this interview on with. Why did you decide to become a stand-up comedian, and were you a funny kid?
These are great questions. I think ultimately I decided to become a stand-up comedian because, as you'll find out later in life, everything's rooted in childhood. And when I was about 11, I snuck downstairs to see what my dad was watching in the living room. And I was laying in the hallway behind him, and he was in a chair facing, away from me. And I saw these little kids in this movie, and I thought, well, I'm a kid, I could watch this. And I started laughing. Ended up being Richard Pryor busting loose. And he then turned me on to Richard Pryor stand-up and Eddie Murphy and so on and so forth. So I used to really love to make my dad and my family laugh. So was I a funny kid? Yes, I was a funny kid, but I wasn't a class clown. I always knew I was funnier than the class clown.
Why did you get into podcasting? I got into the Hudson Hangout because I wanted to interview a Run DMC or Beastie Boy. But my mom was like, you have to get big before you can interview someone that big. So I was like, okay, then I'll start a YouTube channel.
Well, let me tell you something, Hudson. You're 10 times further along than a lot of comedians and people in this business. So good for you, brother. Good for you. I got into podcasting because it was a way to reach an audience that the industry didn't control. If you're a Comedy Central or an HBO or a Netflix, you're funneling stuff out to, a mass audience, but there's so many other talented musicians, comedians, whoever out there. So podcasting was a way to get myself out there and speak for as long as I wanted to without any FCC regulations, without them saying you can say this and you can't say that. And a way to get these stories from these amazing people that I've come across in my career and who I continue to come across, a way for them to get their stories out.
So I know you have a daughter. Does she get to hear your colorful work?
Does my daughter? No. My stepson is, he's 17 now, and he's seen me do stand-up. He's listened to my albums. I talk about him and my daughter in my content. He's done the podcast with me. We are now doing a web series together as well. So he gets to hear my colorful language. My daughter doesn't. And unless I slip, I rarely curse in front of my daughter. I once read that Eminem, the artist Eminem, hip hop artist Eminem, who uses very colorful language in his music, does not curse and does not allow cursing in his home, which I don't know if it's 100% true. I read that and I find that interesting.
That is interesting. On your website, it says that you've appeared on Fox Sports. Can you tell me more about your appearances?
Yeah, on Fox Sports, I did a couple of things. So I did some promos for like NFL Sunday Football. And then there was a web series they had back a while ago called Cubed. And it was, I played they had my character was like sort of an angry cousin who would come on and just rant about current events that they would have me talk about.
How did you get into producing TV shows, and how do you balance that with stand-up?
Man, all right. So let me have another sip of this water here. Well, my major in college was mass communications, TV, film, radio. And I always loved that stuff. And honestly, I wanted a backup plan to whatever was going to happen in my life. So I learned how to do that stuff. Got a job as a PA for what was Fox Family way back when, that became ABC Family. And they're now, I think, called Freeform or something like that. But I started working there as a PA, driving stuff around, a runner. And on the time in between, I would sit with some people and they would teach me how to do promos. So slowly I got into doing promos. And I would start to see, like, hey, they would say, hey, make me a really good promo. I'm like, well, do you have this footage? No, we don't have that. Do you have this footage? No. Do you have Hudson saying this? No, we don't have that. So in a reverse way, I learned how to produce by always having to work without, and always having to, figure out a way without this footage or room tone or whatever it may be. So it made me actually be a really good producer, because I knew what to go get for the people who were in post-production, because that used to be me. And from there, I use those skills as you are to podcasts, with the cameras, with the live switching, with the audio, with the graphics, the websites, you name it, you know all of it. So I once saw an interview with Jamie Foxx where he was talked about the movie Ray. And when he was little, his grandmom used to make him play piano all the time. And he didn't like it. He didn't want to come home and play piano all the time. But later in life, you see that that's a seed that, grew into an Oscar for him. So me in college in the 90s, thinking that this could be a backup plan, it ends up being not only a backup plan, a main plan. I learned how to do it all. And now I do all of that I used to do for Oprah and Fox Sports or Fox or NFL or whatever the heck they are, and all these other companies, Warner Brothers, Kevin Hart. I do it all for myself now.
Right. Um, how do you get ideas for your material?
I get my stuff from everyday life. I like to observe people, which is why this past year has been a little difficult. I'm not out and about observing human behavior and the things people do and the funny things they say. I would say, honestly, I'm my most creative just as I'm falling asleep, just as I'm drifting into a sleep. My mind will be so clear, and I'll start thinking about things and ways to make those funny, or a way to say it funny. And then I'll put that in my phone. And those are the ways I come up with my stuff.
Okay. Who's a comedian that inspires you?
Man, so many inspire me, but I would say at the pinnacle of comedy these days, Dave Chappelle. But my good friend Tom Segura inspires me. I was just telling his wife, Christina, I did their shows. They broke the mold. They are now creating these podcasts just like you have, and they're doing a pay-per-view model. They're breaking the bank. They're not sitting in makeup chairs for hours at a time. They're not listening to executives who've never done what we do give their input on and thoughts and ideas on these shows. So not only is he one of the funniest comedians in the world, but one of the smartest businessmen, and I really look up to him.
Mm-hmm. Any tips for young comedians, podcasters, or interviewers to grow their show?
Yeah, sure. I would say if you're going to do a podcast and you're serious about doing it, then you need to pick a day of the week, and you need to be consistent with that day of the week. And if it's going to be a weekly podcast, then you make sure it's a weekly podcast. If it's monthly, you make sure it's monthly. If you want to grow your audience, then I think it's great to have big guests on, but also you need to go on other people's podcasts and bring their audience over to you. I would say those things are pretty important. I mean, there's a million things, but those are just a handful of them.
Mm-hmm. Can you make up a joke on the spot, or favorite joke? Or favorite joke? What's your favorite joke? And can you make up a joke on the spot?
What's my favorite joke that I've ever written
Doesn't matter.
or ever?
Ever.
Okay, my favorite joke ever, I'm definitely not allowed to say on this show. So, and probably the one that I've written, I'm probably not allowed to say on this show. So I would say that, let me do it this way. My favorite joke that I've ever written is, there's two of them. You can go listen to my album, Get a Hold of Yourself. And you can find it on there, or you can go over to my YouTube and find some on there. Now that's how I answer that, so we don't get in trouble. What was the other question though? It was a two-part question.
Can you make up a joke on the spot?
Can I make up a joke on the spot? Right now, no, but in the moment of something, absolutely, yes. You know, for sure. If we're in a moment and something happens, no doubt. But right now, could I make up a joke on the spot? I mean, look at this background. I got a wall AC and my daughter's artwork right there. I guess that's, it's as good as I got, bro. Can you?
Well, I have a couple jokes in my mind from a joke book.
Tell me your favorite joke so far.
Okay, so it's sort of a story joke, which is, so there's this teddy bear at a restaurant, and the waiter comes over and says, "Would you like seconds?" And the teddy bear says, "No, I'm stuffed."
That's good. That's very good. I'm gonna tell my daughter that one. That is good. Very well
Thank
done.
you.
All right. I don't know many of those anymore. I got some cheesy dad jokes I bust out with my daughter, but they're.
I love dad jokes. They're so dumb.
Okay.
And have you forgotten a punchline while you're in the middle of a routine?
Okay, it's a really good question. I will say this: I'm proud of myself. In 20 years, I'll bet you once or twice, I haven't forgotten it. I've stumbled on it, but less than a handful of times. But after the year layoff of COVID, my first show back, I absolutely butchered a punchline, but not till almost the end of my set. So I would give myself a credit for that. But yeah, it's happened. It's definitely happened.
Where can people find you online?
My website is ryansickler.com. You can go to my YouTube channel at youtube.com/rsickler. Subscribe to the Honeydew podcast and Instagram, all social media. I'm at Ryan Sickler.
Thanks for coming to the show.
Man, thank you for having me. You really do a great job. And you have my friend Sean Polofsky on too. So I'm glad to be following in her footsteps. You're the man.